Good evening. Tonight, I'm celebrating Earth Day, which is actually on Saturday, the 22nd of April. And because it is Earth Day this month, we at Salon thought that it would be a lovely thing to talk about the triumph of nature over adversity. And as you can see, nature is definitely triumphing in my room here, taking over my seat where I like to read every day. You can see all those vines coming in. Um, and it's also taking over my body. And by the end of this evening, I might actually be encased in vines. So if you see the vines beginning to take over my entire corporeal being, give me a wave and then I'll have to try and do something drastic. I'm not sure what. I'd love to know if you have any particular favourite Earth triumphing novels or non-fiction. And do let me know. I've already had a few people contacting me on Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook. But do feel free to give comments as we go along. Now, I'm going to start with one of the books that instantly came to mind, which is Tolkien, the Lord of the Rings trilogy. Um, and the Two Towers, we have the Ents, who Damien brought this back to my mind today on Twitter, reminding me about the trees that rebel against the terrible things that are happening in their world as the orcs are slowly taking over. Now, I'm no Tolkien expert, but I did read all of these when I was young. And the Ents very much became engraved in my psyche. I've always believed in the Ents that they will actually one day get up and start walking and that they would resist the terrible things that are happening to our world too. And actually, that reminds me in Narnia, there are also walking trees. So I do just want to give you a little bit of one of the Ents in The Two Towers by J.R.R. Tolkien, because the trees that Tolkien evokes in these amazing epic books are incredibly life enhancing and definitely give humanity hope. And that's what tonight is all about. We're trying to bring back hope to the earth and show how the earth can resist the terrible things that have been happening to it because of humanity, basically. So this is the chapter called Treebeard, which is the second volume in the Lord of the Rings trilogy by Tolkien, which I'm sure all of you know. And if you don't know, you've probably seen the films. Um, so I'm just going to read you the first bit where Treebeard first appears to the hobbits, and nobody knows what he is. Almost felt like you liked the forest. That's good. That's uncommonly kind of you, said a strange voice. Turn around and let me have a look at your faces. I feel almost that I dislike you both. But do not let us be hasty. Turn around. A large, knob-knuckled hand was laid on each of their shoulders, and they were twisted around, gently but irresistibly, and two great arms lifted them up. Imagine that, being lifted up by a tree, and they don't even know that it's a tree yet. They found that they were looking at a most extraordinary face. It belonged to a large man-like, almost troll-like figure, at least 14 foot high, very sturdy, and with a tall head and hardly any neck. Whether it was clad in stuff like green and grey bark, or whether that was its hide, was difficult to say. At any rate, the arms, at a short distance from the trunk, were not wrinkled, but covered with a brown, smooth skin. The large feet had 7 toes each. That seems a lot to be taking in a very short time by these hobbits. 7 toes each. Noted. The lower part of the long face was covered with a sweeping grey beard, bushy, almost twiggy at the roots. This this and mossy at the ends. But at the moment the hobbits noted little but the eyes. Fair enough. Maybe they didn't notice the toes at that moment. These deep eyes were now surveying them, slow and solemn, but very penetrating. They were brown and with a green light. Often afterwards Pippin tried to describe his first impression of them. One felt as if there was an enormous well behind them, filled up with ages of memory and long, slow, steady thinking. But their surface was sparkling with the present, like sun shimmering on the outer leaves of a vast tree or on the ripples of a very deep lake. I don't know, but it felt as if something that grew on the ground, asleep, you might say, or just feeling itself as something between root tip and leaf tip, between deep earth and sky, had suddenly waked up and was considering you with the same slow care that it had given to its own inside affairs for endless years. Murmured the voice, a deep voice, with a very deep, like a very deep woodwind instrument. Very odd indeed. Do not be hasty, that is my motto. But if I had seen you before I heard your voices, I liked them. Nice little voices. They reminded me of something I cannot remember. If I had seen you before I heard you, I should have just trodden on you, taking you for little orcs, and found out my mistake afterwards. Very odd you are indeed. Root and twig. Very odd. Root and twig. That is one of his exclamations. That's Treebeard. So the Ents in the Lord of the Rings trilogy, they are one of the great symbols of hope in literature and symbols of the earth rebelling against the evil things that are being done to it. And that's what tonight is all about, the earth rebelling. But because we are talking about the earth as well, I am going underground because it's fun to go underground. And there's a lot of amazing novels that take place underground or which refer to the underground. So I am going to refer to quite a few underground novels on this evening before I talk about the other novels which are full of hope for nature. So, The Time Machine by H.G. Wells, which was written in 1895, is an amazing and rather shocking book. Oh, I feel like nature's rebelling against me here. I've got two cats in this room and they're definitely trying to do their best to get involved. Give me a wave if you see a cat. They're definitely trying to get involved with my vine leaves at the moment. The Time Machine. This is a story which you might think is science fiction and you might think that it's all about time travel. It's really a kind of critique on the class system of the time in 1895 because there are two races in the world which our time machine hero, who's I think just called the Traveller, the place where he goes has two races. He's gone far into the future. And these two races are the Eloi and the Morlocks. The Eloi are very effete, feminine seeming, very weak and feeble. They're beautiful, they're graceful, they have lovely silvery voices. And on the other hand, the Morlocks are sallow skinned, they're very pale, they have very big eyes, they can actually only see in the dark. The Eloi seem to be benevolent, and the Morlocks seem to be the opposite. And there is possibly an accusation of racism to be brought in, but people have argued that these two races, which are described here, are logical extensions of the classes that were occurring in real life at the time of H.G. Wells' writing. And he took these classes perhaps to their logical conclusion. So the rich upper class became the very effete, feeble, thoughtless people who just wanted toys and distraction and had absolutely no concentration span. The Morlocks live underground and they essentially are the servants of the Eloi, the upper class, and they actually have a more sinister side in that they live underground, they come out at night, and they actually eat the Eloi, which is pretty horrifying, let's face it. Um, and this all slowly unravels as the book goes on. It is a brilliant read. It was written in 1895. It obviously seems a little bit dated in many ways, but it does have an absolutely fantastic story, and it's very much a precursor of many a fabulous sci-fi novel or dystopian novel of our era. It does carry with it implicit criticism of the social conditions of the time, because the working class of H.G. Wells's era did live in cramped and oppressive surroundings, cut off from natural conditions, just like the Morlocks in his novel. So I will just give you a little quote from it, because he is a brilliant writer, H.G. Wells. He is someone that one can return to many a time. A queer thing I soon discovered about my little hosts, and that was their lack of interest. They would come to me with eager cries of astonishment like children, but like children they would soon stop examining me and wander away after some other toy. The dinner and my conversational beginnings ended, I noted for the first time that almost all those who had surrounded me at first were gone. It is odd, too, how speedily I came to disregard these little people. I went out through the portal into the sunlit world again as soon as my hunger was satisfied. I was continually meeting more of these men of the future, who would follow me a little distance, chatter and laugh about me, and having smiled and gesticulated in a friendly way, lead me again to my own devices. That's another interesting thing about this story. The Eloi, who are the people that live above the ground, they are fearless because they've kind of become uh, they've become immune to the idea of danger. They've been too spoiled. They are like children, and it is all deeply sinister. The calm of evening was upon the world as I emerged from the great hall, and the scene was lit by warm glow of the setting sun. At first, things were very confusing. Everything was so entirely different from the world I had known, even the flowers. The big building I'd left was situated on the slope of a broad river valley, but the Thames had shifted, perhaps, a mile from its present position. I resolved to mount to the summit of a crest, perhaps a mile and a half away, from which I could get a wider view of this, our planet, in the year 800 and 2701 AD. For that, I should explain, was the date the little dials of my machine recorded. I won't give you too much of the detail that he goes into. Another great thing, by the way, about the H.G. Wells books is that they're almost all very short. The Time Machine is a novella, and that is one of its attractions. It's a very good read, and it's also quite short. And I'll just read you a little bit more about the people that live underground, because I do have a particular fascination this evening with books underground, and I'm going to talk about a couple more, because we are, after all, talking about the earth. Beneath my feet, then, the earth must be tunnelled enormously, and these tunnellings were the habitat of the new race. The presence of the ventilating shafts and wells along the hill slopes, everywhere in fact, except along the river valley, showed how universal were its ramifications. What so natural then as to assume that it was in this artificial underworld that such work as was necessary to the comfort of the daylight race was done? That is the sinister aspect of this book, The Time Machine by H.G. Wells. The race, the Morlocks, who are the working class, basically live underground, and they are pandering to the needs of the people that live above ground. Does it sound a little bit like some cities, maybe in deserts in other parts of the world, where there are forgotten people who are the servants of the people living in luxury on top of them? What was so natural then as to assume that it was in this artificial underworld that such work as was necessary to the comfort of the daylight race, was done. The notion was so plausible that I at once accepted it and went on to assume the how of this splitting of the human species. I dare say you will anticipate the shape of my theory, though for myself I very soon felt that it fell far short of the truth. At first, proceeding from the problems of our own age, it seemed clear as daylight to me that the gradual widening of the present merely temporary and social difference between the capitalist and the labourer was the key to the whole position. No doubt it will seem grotesque enough to you and wildly incredible, and yet, even now, there are existing circumstances to point that way. 1895, just to remind you. There is a tendency to utilize underground space to the less ornamental purposes of civilization. There is the Metropolitan Railway in London, for instance. There are new electric railways, there are subways, there are underground workrooms and restaurants. And they increase and multiply. Evidently, I thought, this tendency had increased until industry had gradually lost its birthright in the sky. I mean that it had gone deeper and deeper into larger and ever larger underground factories, spending a still increasing amount of its time therein, till in the end, even now, does not an East End worker live in such artificial conditions as practically to be cut off from the natural surface of the earth? H.G. Wells was actually someone who did really get very concerned about the people, the workers around him in London. And that's what he was writing about in The Time Machine. And actually, this idea that he had of people working more and more underground reminds me of another book that I'm reading right now, which is Eleanor Catton's new book, Birnam Wood, in which there is a multimillionaire who is building himself a bunker to go and live in when everything goes to crap in the world. And there's a lot about bunkers for the super rich in that book, which is all rather fascinating. People going underground in order to escape the ravages of the earth is a common theme and a very interesting one in literature. And I wonder if many of you have read The Underground Man by Mick Jackson, which is here, which is a fascinating, brilliant, quite disturbing book, some would say. It's a historical novel which follows an eccentric older aristocrat called the Duke of Portland, who lives in isolation on his estate in Welbeck. The book is set in the Victorian era and it's loosely modelled on the real life and real escapades of the eccentric William Cavendish Scott Bentinck, who served as the 5th Duke of Portland. The story focuses on the Duke's life, but it's particularly centred around the latest mission of the Duke to create a series of underground tunnels beneath his estate. And the rumours were that he created miles and miles of tunnels under his estate in real life. And that's what Mick Jackson has explored in his fascinating, brilliant novel. I'm going to read you a couple of extracts so that you get a sense of what it's like in his underground world. It's actually written in diary form. I don't think the whole thing's in diary form. I'm just trying to remember. It's been a while since I read the entire novel, but some of it is in diary extracts, and that makes it all the more compelling. See, the very beginning is from His Grace's journal, September the 30th, but I think a lot of it is other people's accounts as well, like Mrs. Pledger's account, a housemaid's account, and so on. So it's a highly recommended read, and I'll just read you a little bit of a couple of extracts from his diaries. The Underground Man, Mick Jackson. September the 30th. I have heard me described as a wiry man, which I interpret as meaning held together with wires, and seems altogether quite fitting and fair. When I walk or bend or even grimace, they can be seen twitching under the skin like tense lengths of twine. Of late, however, I've become uncertain whether all these wires are properly attached. Some appear to have grown quite slack, one or two to have come away from their housing altogether. On a bad day, I worry that somewhere inside of me an essential spring might have snapped to dangle and rattle about in me for the rest of my days. I've also recently noticed how in wet weather I have a tendency to creak. There's no denying it. It's plain for all to hear. So on damp days I stay in by the fire and play Patience or Bagatelle. All the same, I think wiry still just about does the job, even if the wires are not as taut as they once were. I imagined, as a young man, growing old would be something like the feeling one has at the close of a long and satisfying day. A not unpleasant lassitude, always remedied by a good night's sleep. But I now know it to be the gradual revelation of one's body as nothing more than a bag of unshakable aches. Old age is but the reduced capacity of a failing machine. Even my sleep, that beautiful oblivion always relied upon for replenishment, now seems to founder, has somehow lost its step. My fingers and toes are cold the whole year round, as if my fire is slowly going out. It is a rather sad book, it has to be said. And I'm going to read you a little bit about his underground explorations. Really, it's all about an old eccentric man who has too much time on his hands and has a kind of charming eccentricity and desire to travel and live underground. November the 22nd. It occurred to me, not for the first time, that perhaps the autumn air is bad for me. So I decided to walk to Cresswell as I had originally planned to yesterday, but to do so underground. I forewent the lime frock coat for a light-coloured paletot and took a fur muff instead of gloves. Otherwise, I was dressed much the same as yesterday, when around 2 o'clock I set off down the Western Tunnel. The coach rode 20 yards behind me, with both Grimshaw and Clement aboard. Clement insisted he come along, bringing with him blankets, sweet biscuits, and a pot of cold rice pudding in case I required sustenance on the way. Isn't that crazy? There goes this eccentric aristocrat walking down his tunnel with a coach and horses behind him. And on the coach, he also has a servant, Clement, who's brought with him biscuits, blankets, and cold rice pudding, because he's obviously going on this long adventure. Utterly insane. A grand walk it was too. I had not examined the tunnels so closely since they were finished, and I must say I was very pleased with what I saw. The brickwork is quite magnificent, and the Western Tunnel in particular runs about as straight as an arrow. One problem, which neither Mr. Bird nor I had reckoned on, was that the tops of some of the skylights have got covered over with fallen leaves. And so he has skylights. That's rather clever. He's not completely in darkness. Phew. I made a mental note to have some lad sent out and sweep them clean as soon as we returned. Felt altogether quite bright and cheery as I headed underground towards Cresswell village, so I set up a little singing session, starting off with Johnny Sands, an old favourite of mine, then on to a few rounds of I Am 99. The many echoes that first interfered with my performance and made me lose my place, but in time I managed to gauge their duration and incorporate them into the song, so that I was able, after a fashion, to duet with myself. I broke the song up, line by line, one harmony placed carefully upon another, until at last the whole tunnel rang with a chorus of my voices. I sang the lead and I sang the alto, had a stab at treble and a breathy profundo bass. Like a military man, I marched along and opened my lungs right up, once or twice, even managing to knock together some semblance of a descant on top. So that's The Underground Man by Mick Jackson, A Tale of a Very Eccentric Man. I'm afraid it is not a story of hope and optimism about Earth overcoming adversity, but it is just a fascinating story about a man who wants to live underground. But moving on to more excitingly uplifting and positive stories of Earth and Earth overcoming matters. I will just stick with the underground theme for another minute or two. And actually, it occurs to me that I should definitely do a session all about underground literature. That would be fun, wouldn't it? Tell me if you think of any good books that I should talk about. I can immediately think of a few. Robert Macfarlane. He is always a great person to turn to in hours of need when you want to be cheered up thinking about nature, because he writes so beautifully about nature in all aspects. And I happen to know right now he's writing a book about rivers, which is called The River is Alive. I'm really excited about that. Can't wait for when it comes out, because as I understand it, it's all about rivers actually having a spirit. I might be wrong. That's me reading between the lines of what they're saying about his new book. But Robert Macfarlane, amazing writer about nature, about road highways, the old ways. And he wrote a wonderful book called Underland. And I'm going to read you a little bit about what Robert Macfarlane himself said about Underland. Peter Ackroyd, who's also written about the underground world in terms of London, said that Robert Macfarlane had single-handedly managed to change any reader's perception of what was beneath their feet. Rather than feeling like something solid, he said, we now see the, the ground beneath our feet as the roof of something that is underneath it. And that is a totally wonderful concept that Robert Macfarlane managed to completely change our entire perception of the earth and the way that the underground, what's beneath our feet, works, lives, breathes, and what it contains. So this is what Robert Macfarlane has to say about his book, Underland. That is true insofar as I'm fascinated as to why I have been drawn high. So he's talking about why he wants to go high and why he wants to go low in his life and in his explorations. I too am interested in how I have been personally been drawn low. In a way, this has not been so much the imprint of a particular landscape upon my soul and heart, but actually a landscape or a realm, if we want to call it that, that's been imprinted upon the species. I say that in part because mountain climbing, which seems so naturalized to us, is only a scant 300 years old in terms of a culturally and historical impulse of the Western imagination. However, the journey into darkness is older than us. We have gone into caves to leave marks, to make and retrieve meaning, to move through the membrane of the rock, and to play music. That impulse is a much older one than to go high. So it may be an attempt to retrieve the contours of the soul of the species, if that in any sense is a possible task. Who of you has been tempted to go low, to go into caves, even to go potholing? I would love to know. Have any of you done that? Do any of you like going into caves? I'm always a bit terrified. I've seen too many disaster movies with caves, and also when I have been in, I've always found it pretty terrifying. Though I did go into an amazing cave in Trinidad where the oil birds lived in the Asa Wright Centre, and that was an incredible experience. But you didn't actually have to go that deep down. You just went maybe 20 feet under, and you didn't have to go through any horrible small tunnels. Anyway, more of Robert Macfarlane because we love him. I am a very structurally, formally, stylistically, and rhythmically minded writer, which is not to say I get these things right, but I pay them great attention. The simplest and the oldest of the forms of the book is, in a way, the simplest and the oldest of the forms of all our stories, going back to a variant of the Epic of Gilgamesh, the descent and the time below ground in darkness, where knowledge is found and lost loved ones are met with and cannot be retrieved in most cases. That's very true often when we're going underground in books and novels and poems. It's to meet our dead loved ones who we can't bring back. Then a resurfacing occurs, a return to the light that's often the hardest part because one journeys down. Unlike a mountain, one must journey up. I wanted the reader to undertake a catabasis in this sense as well, to make that descent and feel the pressure of deep time and darkness, and all the wonder and horror that has happened below ground. These chambers, in a sense, these are spaces where ideas and voices that echo and speak to one another, and the reader lifts a flickering torch and sees a cave wall with impossible scenes on it. Those are the chambers, and they speak of all the great tasks of the Underland to reveal, to store, to keep safe, to shelter, and to dispose. Robert Macfarlane, don't you just love him, the way he writes? Great to see Red Lion Books, Griffin Books, and lots of other fabulous people joining me here tonight on this celebration of Earth Day. I would love to know if you have favourite books, could be recent, could be older, which are ones that inspire you in terms of Earth, nature, and nature overcoming either humanity or general adversity. Just a little bit more from Robert Macfarlane before I move on to some other books. We know so little of the worlds beneath our feet. Look up on a cloudless night and you might see the light from a star, thousands of trillions of miles away. Or pick out the craters left by asteroid strikes on the moon's base. Look down and your sight stops at topsoil, tarmac, toe. I rarely felt as far from the human realm as when only 10 yards below it, caught in the shining jaws of a limestone bedding plain, first formed on the floor of an ancient sea. The Underland keeps its secrets well. Only in the last 20 years have ecologists succeeded in tracing the fungal networks that lace woodland soil. Merlin Sheldrake, another person that we need to celebrate when it comes to writing about nature in an amazing and completely mind-blowing fashion. Fungal networks, just had to slip that one in. Joining individual trees into intercommunicating forests, as fungi have been doing for hundreds of millions of years. In China's Chongqing province, a cave network explored in 2013 was found to possess its own weather system. Ladders of stacked mist that build in a huge central hall, cold fog that drifts in giant cloud chambers far from the reach of the sun. 1,000 feet underground in northern Italy, I abseiled into an immense rotunda of stone, cut by a buried river and filled with dunes of black sand. Traversing those dunes on foot was like trudging through a windless desert on a lightless planet. Why go low? It is a counterintuitive action, running against the grain of sense and the gradient of the spirit. Deliberately to place something in the Underland is almost always a strategy to shield it from easy view. Actively to retrieve something from the Underland almost always requires effortful work. The Underland's difficulty of access has long made it a means of symbolizing what cannot be openly said or seen. Loss, grief, the mind's obscure depths, and what Elaine Scarry calls the deep subterranean fact of physical pain. Where am I? A long cultural history of abhorrence exists around underground spaces, associating them with the awful darkness inside the world, in Cormac McCarthy's phrase. Fear and disgust are the usual responses to such environments. Dirt, mortality, and brutal labour, the dominant connotations. That's all in H.G. Wells as well. Claustrophobia is surely the sharpest of all common phobias, something I definitely suffer from. I've often noticed how claustrophobia, much more so than vertigo, retains its disturbing power, even when being experienced indirectly as narrative or description. Hearing stories of confinement below ground, people shift uneasily, step away, look to the light, as if words alone could wall them in. I still remember as a 10-year-old reading the account in Alan Garner's novel, The Weird Stone of Brisingamen, sorry, I always pronounce that wrong, Brisingamen, of two children escaping danger by descending the mining tunnels that riddled the sandstone outcrop of Audley Edge in Cheshire. Deep inside the edge, the embrace of the stone becomes so tight that it threatens to trap them. They lay full length, walls, floor, and roof, fitting them like a second skin. Their heads were turned to one side, for in any other position the roof pressed their mouths into the sand, and they could not breathe. The only way to advance was to pull with the fingertips and to push with the toes, since it was impossible to flex their legs at all, and any bending of the elbows threatened to jam the arms helplessly under the body. That's horrific. That was Robert Macfarlane quoting from um, The Weird Stone of Brisingamen by Alan Garner, which is an amazing book. And he says, these passages took cold grip of my heart, emptied my lungs of air. Rereading them now, I feel the same sensations, but the situation also exerted a powerful narrative traction upon me, and still does. Colin could not move. He's the hero in the book. And I could not stop reading. Oh, have I just got a little bit? I think I've missed a bit here. So that was Robert Macfarlane singing the praises of Alan Garner and talking about the hideous claustrophobia of being underground. But he wrote a whole book about being underground called Underland, and it is an absolutely brilliant and fabulous piece of literary non-fiction, which I would highly recommend to anyone. And the amazing thing about him also is that he is so much of a celebrator of nature and of natural wonders that he actually makes you feel incredibly positive about the earth conquering and overcoming adversity, which is what I'm celebrating tonight and thinking about for Saturday, for Earth Day. Now, a couple of other interesting books going off in some different directions. Follow Me to Ground by Sue Rainsford is a kind of horror, poetic, semi-fantasy, amazing, interesting, strange piece of fiction, which does have a bit of body horror in it. There's the fear of being buried alive, fear of the undead, the monstrosity of psychic possession. One character takes over another's body like a too big hand in an ill-fitting glove. But in this book, Follow Me to the Ground, there is also wonder and tenderness too. It's a really interesting book in which the ground itself is magical, and the ground has given birth to two beings, a father and a daughter, who are the hero and heroine of the book, and they have special powers which they bring to the humans around them. The humans know that these creatures from the ground are not human, and the people that come from the ground, the father and daughter, there is no mother, are able to cure the humans of their various ailments, including diseases, strange growths, worries, fears, both psychic and physical ailments can be cured by these beings. But it's not all positive, and it's a very strange, mysterious, brilliant, and intriguing book. However, I'm going to move on, knowing that time is going to run out, to one of the most interesting recent novels about Earth overcoming adversity and nature being at threat and at risk, which is Overstory by Richard Powers, which is an amazing, brilliant, big, fat novel. And I have spoken about it before many a time because it's just such a brilliant read. So I won't go into it in great depth this evening. But if you haven't read it yet, you must, because it is a book all about trees, the importance of trees, the joy of trees, the sadness of trees, the longevity of trees. And it even has one strand of its story being told from the perspective of a tree, and you learn a lot about trees by reading the book. And it also is a massive kick to humanity to do something about the way we treat the planet, particularly the way we treat trees. Um, I will just read you a little description of it for people that don't know it. The overstory begins with the Hurl family, Norwegians who emigrated to Brooklyn in the mid 19th century before setting out for Iowa and starting a farm. They brought with them the seeds of a chestnut grove and planted it at the edge of a cornfield. And that's a lovely thing, isn't it? To bring with you from all the way from Norway the seeds of a chestnut grove which they plant when they get to their new life in Iowa. One of the trees makes it to maturity far enough from any other chestnuts to survive the great blight that sweeps through the US in the early 1900s, which is described in the book, and it's utterly tragic. Eventually, and for no reason he can understand, Old Man Hurl takes it into his head to photograph the tree on the same day in March every year, which is a tradition he then passes on to his son and which we see happening. He then passes it on to his grandson and great grandson and so on as the farm shrinks in the face of modernisation. Uh, in the final Hurl, Nick, a young art school grad, sells off the last of the land and the house, but keeps the pile of 100-year-old photographs that track not only the passage of time through a tree, but the evolution of the technology that recorded it. So that in itself is a great story, but that is only a tiny part of the whole story because it's a very complex and pretty stunningly complicated and brilliantly written book. This vine is beginning to attack me. It's fighting back. The conceit allows Powers to think of family life in terms of tree years, and that is what makes it so brilliant, among many other things. The actual stories are brilliant. The slow changes, the generational development, the way patterns are formed and turn out to matter more in the long term than the people they are shaped from. The book is split into 4 sections: root, trunk, crown, and seeds. Root spreads itself out across 8 very different lives, extended short stories, each of which hinges in some way on a character's relationship to trees. So I won't go into it in total depth, but it is a very complicated book. It has a lot going on. One of the characters in it who I love is a man who gets paralyzed when he falls out of a tree, ironically, and he then becomes an amazing game developer who is so brilliant that he amasses a small fortune and begins to take over the world with his games. And he has a very big impact on some of the other characters in the book. It is one of the books where, as you read it, you're thinking, is this ever going to start weaving together? Because you have all these different stories. But it does. It all begins to make sense and have its own internal logic as you go on. And there is a moment in it, people that haven't read it, I won't do spoilers, which does make you think, oh my God, is it actually incredibly depressing and full of gloom? But it does have hope, and it is actually quite a lovely, positive, amazing book, which is uplifting and takes you onto a new plane. So, as The Guardian says, there's something exhilarating in reading a novel whose context is wider than human life. And that is absolutely true. It is a book which is tackling not just time in an epic way, but also the entire planet. And it is a book that you might want to go back to and read more than once. That's Overstory by Richard Powers. Damien also mentioned one of his favourite recent books, which gives us hope for the planet, which is Peter Frankopan's The Earth Transformed, An Untold History. I haven't had the joy of reading it yet. I've had a good look at it in the shops and it looks brilliant. I'm dying to read it. And I'll read you a bit of a description of it. In The Earth Transformed, Peter Frankopan, one of the world's leading historians, shows that the natural environment is a crucial, if not the defining factor in global history, not just of humankind. Volcanic eruptions, solar activities, atmospheric, oceanic, and other shifts, as well as anthropogenic behaviour, are fundamental parts of the past and the present. In this magnificent and groundbreaking book, we learn about the origins of our species, about the development of religion and language and their relationships with the environment, about how the desire to centralise agricultural surplus formed the origins of the bureaucratic state, about how growing demands for harvests resulted in the increased shipment of enslaved peoples, about how efforts to understand and manipulate the weather have a long and deep history. All provide lessons of profound importance as we face a precarious future of rapid global warming. However, it is a book that does have aspects of positivity, hope, and um, maybe a kind of gentle positivity to it. Taking us from the Big Bang to the present day and beyond, The Earth Transformed forces us to reckon with humankind's continuing efforts to make sense of the natural world. Satnam Sanghera says, "This is epic, gripping, original history that leaps off the page. I wanted to buy everyone I know a copy." So that is Peter Frankopan's new book, A History, which I do think everyone should read. And I fully intend to very soon. So a couple of you did mention books that have given you hope and made you think differently about the earth, and have made you think differently about nature. I had a friend, Phil, who mentioned on Twitter that Lord of the Flies is a book that gave him hope in nature. Intriguingly, it is a book where nature kind of takes over, and gives people a new perspective on life. If you haven't read this yet, you've got to read it. I'm sure that most people either read it at school or know the story but haven't actually read it. So if you read it at school, go back and read it again. It's still brilliant. I can actually totally recommend it as a great, disturbing, fabulous read. And in a way, I do think it is about the triumph of nature over humanity. But it doesn't really have a very uplifting message, let's face it. Another one that a friend Fiona mentioned on Twitter, as a book that gives her hope for nature against humanity and against the marauders of the world, whether it is climate change caused by humans or, well, in this case, it's all very complicated. It's all about the scientists really um, creating a vast conspiracy theory which shunts out pharmaceuticals into our mouths and then gives us diseases which we then have to cure with more pharmaceuticals. It's all about addiction in many ways, and it's all about us being controlled by big pharma. But Oryx and Crake, it is actually a fantastic read. It's very funny, it's very depressing, and in some ways, I would contend that it is a positive outlook on nature, because in this book, without giving you total spoilers, humans are coming very, very close to completely destroying themselves. This is a dystopian novel, and they actually um, almost die out. But then there's a scientist, a mad scientist, who is called Crake, who creates his own version of humanity, which is very interesting and very different to humanity as we currently know it. So nature does take over, but then also in the book, the scientists have done lots of terrible things to animals. They've used genetic modification to create new types of animals, such as luminous rabbits and um, hogs, which are enormous and seem really rather horrifyingly intelligent. And nature has been massively messed with by humanity in Margaret Atwood's novel Oryx and Crake, but nature in a way does triumph. And there's two other books in her trilogy. One's called Mad Adam and one's called The Year of the Flood. And they're both equally funny, brilliant, and grim. But they also really do make you laugh a lot. And I think she's great in terms of making you feel like you've got to take action and do something about it. So she does give you a rallying cry to get out there and do what you can to save the world. Now, Earth Day, Saturday, um, a day to celebrate the Earth and to think about how we can actually help fight against climate change. Fahrenheit 451, Ray Bradbury. This is a book which you might not associate with being highly positive in terms of nature overcoming humanity and nature overcoming adversity. But it actually is a book which has a really optimistic ending. Optimistic, you might say, in the way that the ending of Cormac McCarthy's The Road is optimistic. But Fahrenheit 451, Ray Bradbury, amazing book. If you haven't read it, read it immediately. It's all about the destruction of individual thought by the state, and it's all about the state trying to destroy books. Fahrenheit 451 is the temperature at which books burn. Also, Ray Bradbury claims. And Ray Bradbury, amazing writer. He famously always wrote on a typewriter that was in a library near his house where he had to put a dime in every half an hour to pay to write his book. And he does say there's a little lovely extract at the end of this book where he talks about how writing this book was a dime, it was a dime book. I'll just read you that little book. I didn't know it, but I was literally writing a dime novel. In the spring of 1950, it cost me $9.80 in dimes to write and finish the first draft of The Fireman, which later became Fahrenheit 451. So that was a dime novel. And this book ends, quite scary things happening in the back of my room. Don't know if it's the vines or the cats. The vines might be trying to break in. Quite alarming. Um, so at the very end of this book, Montag, who is our hero, he started off as one of the people that burnt books, but he has a sudden revelation that he doesn't want to burn the books. He actually wants to become one of the people that rebels against the book burners. And one of the ways that he rebels is to join this group of revolutionaries who have all agreed that they're going to each learn a book by heart so that they can actually be a living book. And the last couple of pages of the book are all about how that he and his troop of merry men and women are going off into the wilderness with these books in their heart. And it actually is a very positive and lovely image. Um, he also has a little bit of Ecclesiastes from the very end of the book. So I'll just read you a little last couple of paragraphs to show you that despite it seeming like a dystopian and tragic novel, it actually does have a lot of hope and positivity. But now there was a long morning's walk until noon, and if the men were silent, It was because there was everything to think about and much to remember. Perhaps later in the morning, when the sun was up and had warmed them, they would begin to talk or just say the things they remembered, to be sure they were there, to be absolutely certain that things were safe in them. Montag felt the slow stir of words, the slow simmer, and when it came his turn, what could he say? What could he offer on a day like this to make the trip a little easier? To everything there is a season. Yes, a time to break down and a time to build up. Yes, a time to keep silence and a time to speak. Yes, all that. But what else? What else? Something, something. And on either side of the river was there a tree of life, which bare 12 manner of fruits, and yielded her fruit every month. And the leaves of the tree were for the healing of the nations. Yes, thought Montag, that's the one I'll save for noon, when we reach the city. That's the end of Fahrenheit 451, which has a kind of tree of life at the very end of it. And talking of trees of life, another book which was mentioned to me by someone that emailed me to talk about books that bring them hope for Earth and for Earth and humanity is a book which I do often mention because it's such a beautiful book, The Man Who Planted Trees by Jean Giono, which is a fable of sorts with very beautiful woodcuts in it, which are really lovely and make it all the more a desirable and lovely book to have with you at all times, if possible. And it's got a really great foreword by Richard Mabey in this version. I'm just going to read you a little bit from Richard Mabey because Richard Mabey is an amazing writer about nature as well, and he is someone that we should all be reading too. And I would definitely urge you to go and get his books. And I love the way he writes about Jean Giono's book. I'm just reading an extract from his foreword. His legacy on both counts has been enormous and positive, but half a century on, and wiser perhaps about both the lives of trees and the human capacity for self-deception, we should be as wary of too literal an interpretation of his goals as of the story itself. Recently, tree planting has too often become an easy escape clause, a cheapskate forfeit for fossil fuel abuse, a PR gesture by dubious corporations, a panacea for environmental ills that would have been better prevented than compensated for. It's been done sometimes in the wrong place, in the wrong places, with the wrong species, and where it might have been better to have let nature itself decide the planting programme. Giono has Elzayard say ironically to the state foresters determined to protect the natural forest that this was the first time ever that a forest had sprung up of its own accord. But of course, forests do everywhere and have done so for eons. To forget this is to ignore nature's own capacity for reparation and feed our habits, our hubris, sorry. Perhaps the way to read this book in the 21st century is to fully respect Giono's imaginative intentions. The trees, like the story, are allegorical, symptoms of, symbols of reciprocity. We can still gift them to the earth, but the earth, properly treated, also gifts them back to us. On that beautiful and lovely note, I will come to an end. It's been lovely having you with me this evening. Do enjoy Earth Day and read lots of amazing and lovely books all about Earth. Oh, I'm just going to quickly mention my favourite book, Jitterbug Perfume. This also does have Pan in it. Pan, symbol of nature. At the beginning of the book, he is invisible because everyone's forgotten about him. But as the book progresses, Pan becomes more solid. He gets his goatee smell back, and he gets some of his Pan-like powers back too. As you can see, I'm very inspired by Pan, and this is a great book that also gives you hope and faith in nature. So this is a really fun one, which will make you feel like anything is possible. And I feel that's a really good note to leave on as well. So I'll be back on my Facebook and Instagram next week doing my own topic. Yet to be decided what it will be. And next month, I will be doing in May, I'll be doing Gardens in Literature on Damien Barr's Literary Salon Facebook and Instagram pages. So do join me there. Don't forget also you can book bibliotherapy sessions with me one-to-one. You can find my website, ellabear2.com. Thanks so much for coming. Thank you for viewing all sorts. Lovely to see you here. And have a great evening. I hope you all enjoy reading lots of excellent books about Earth and about nature. And do send me your thoughts, your favourite books, your suggestions. Keep them coming because I'd love to know what you think and what gives you hope when you are perhaps feeling down about nature, about the world, and whether we can save the earth. But this book is always one that's going to bring you hope. Thank you so much and see you very soon. Good night.